What if fundraising's not just about the bottom line? What if it is about who you become and what you believe in the process? And what if the journey is bigger than you and your ministry?
Welcome to Season 4 of It's Not About the Money. Join us as we examine elements of ministry fundraising through the unique lens of personal formation. Let's dive in. All right, guys, welcome back to the show. We're recapping Ekren Miller's episode, and just as a reminder, he's a great guy. He's an experienced fundraiser, and we talked about the principles of fundraising. We focused on relationship building, crafting the effective ask, donor stewardship, a lot of this stuff. So let's just jump right into the top here. I think that one of the things that stood out to me right away is that fundraising is an invitation, and it's not begging.
Right.
And we talk about that, but it warrants repeating again and again and again, right? So we talked about Henry Nouwen. We talked about not kind of going to your donors with your hat in your hand. We had this example of this Texas fundraiser who welcomes people, in my mind, into his appropriated den with, in my mind, like an animal head on the wall and things.
Mahogany furniture.
Mahogany, a library, leather furniture, something in a display case.
Yeah. Maybe golf stuff. I don't know.
Golf paraphernalia in the corner. Right. Maybe a putting green.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. How do you feel that translates, though, to, do you agree with Nouwen 100%, or do you think that really translates? Or what do we need to be careful about when we think about individual ministry fundraisers?
Yeah, I don't think that what Nouwen was saying is, try to impress with your appearance. Right. I think it was trying to get it just be who you are and don't downplay, don't look like a beggar.
Yeah. Be
who you are, put your best foot forward, show people that they can trust what they're entrusting to you, because the ambiance you've set communicates I steward well and things like that.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's not so much the external environment that you're welcoming people into. It's maybe like the internal wealth. That you realize that this is what I'm a part of. I don't have a Land Rover, but I get to rove the lands. we can cut that out.
I'm leaving it.
Okay. But you do have a certain amount of spiritual wealth, and we talk about this when you make decisions not to pursue the typical path or the career ladder or the rat race. You do get ruined for the ordinary by the generosity of a loving God who just says this is actually what life is about. Mm-hmm. And think about the people that have to work so hard just to get a few days of vacation when you have I don't know about your experience on the field, but I have a slower pace of life. Mm-hmm. And I got a lot of time with my family. And I think people, there's multimillionaires that would just not kill, but they would really love to spend more time with their families. But they've made certain choices that prohibit that. Mm-hmm. So there's an interior wealth, I think, that we can definitely agree with, right?
Yeah.
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 I wonder, dear listener, if you're hearing this, if you've ever actually felt kind of apologetic.
Mm-hmm. Asking for support.
Yeah. And what should you do? What would you think they should do if they say yes?
Maybe just reflect on, why do you think that is? Certainly in North American culture, there is this kind of understanding that we don't talk about money, we don't need or depend on other people. So certainly that's at play. But yeah, I think it can be helpful to just even go a layer deeper, thinking about your own family system, what you learned about money, what you learned about need, and how safe it was to depend on or need things from other people. We've referenced this before, but we have several episodes that speak to these things. I think of, obviously, the episode with the counselors talking about our scripts around money, the episode we had with Dr. Moreau from Wheaton about the things we believe. Our Soundtracks episode most recently, there's reasons that we operate in the ideas that we hold, and the idea that asking for support is something you have to feel bad about or feel sorry for.
Yeah.
There's a reason you have that idea.
And it could be, like we talked about how you were raised, like it could be even the church environment that you were raised in. Your church could have this misconception that fundraising is like begging.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that speaks to the need for us to help to rewire them a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And that could start from like a grassroots movement of no, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. But I think it is changing. I get the sense that it's changing over time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I've told this story before, but stop me if I have. I was having this conversation with my mom recently where she was telling me that when she and my dad were raising money to go to the mission field to Papua New Guinea to help with translation work with Wycliffe, when my great-grandmother heard that my dad had built the house there in Ukarumpa, with help, but he had built a house and it was nice. It was traditional, it had walls and windows and a roof. She was beside herself. She was furious because they weren't sleeping on the floor, on like the dirt floor in some hut, because in her mind, that's what a missionary's life should look like.
Wow.
Now she grew up, Depression era, there's a whole lore connected with my great grandmother that I won't get into now. But I do think some people are that worldview and mindset is lingering, unfortunately, with some people. But I think it feels like it's kind of phasing out.
Yeah, that is so interesting. So it's almost kind of this like romanticized view of the missionary being same as the native people, and that there's not really room for the missionary to live in a different way, especially if it appears as though it's a more affluent way or something.
Yeah, I don't know if that's what it was. Yeah.
Interesting, yeah.
Or just that a missionary, if they're on support, should be living in poverty.
Yeah.
Like that whole poverty mindset.
Right. Interesting.
And I do believe that she ended up sending my parents some used tea bags.
Wow. Used tea bags.
Right. As a care in the care package, along with other things. But like you can use these tea bags. There's still a little bit of life left in those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting. I don't think you've told that story here before. So yeah. Well, I don't know. Maybe this feels really dissonant from that story, but I would definitely want to unpack and talk about Ekren's 4 pillars.
Yeah.
The kind of the stages that he
hard pivot.
Takes people. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
I mean, in all fairness, we did not talk with Ekren about used tea bags. So
no, we did.
You're the one that took us off course, man.
Yeah. Yeah. So Ekren's 4 pillars are, just to recap real quick, qualify. So Ekren's 4 pillars, just to recap real quick: qualification, which is the process of identifying potential donors; cultivation, which is building relationships; solicitation, making the ask; and stewardship, which is the thanking and the maintaining, the following up again and again and again. To me, it feels like I feel really confident and comfortable with the last 2.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a lot of teaching on that. To me, it feels to digress a little bit when we get into, well, how do I qualify people and how do I really cultivate it? It looks a little bit different in my mind for an individual donor.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask, he said he spends the majority of his time in cultivation, I think, right? When he was talking about the way that they mark his time. And so I was just wondering, in your own process, where do you feel you spent the most time in your fundraising career?
The 4th pillar.
Yeah.
By far.
Right.
I mean, the cultivation happened organically.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just, these are the people that I know in my life. So there wasn't necessarily a qualification phase at all.
Right.
It was like, I'm just going to get to know people. And, oh, by the way, I'm going on the mission field.
Yeah. It's almost like for the individual fundraiser, the qualification and cultivation piece are just kind of like God's, just kind of like this partnering with God and just like building your life as it is, right? Like the qualification is just kind of the context you grow up in, the people you have opportunity to engage and meet and share life with over years and years, right?
But maybe this is where things start to get divergent when we have somebody who's grown up in the church in maybe an affluent neighborhood or community or the Bible Belt, or somebody who's a brand new believer.
Totally.
Or someone who has grown up in a not affluent neighborhood. That it can be, that's where we start to see the disparity, I think.
Well, and I guess that's where the power of referrals comes in. You know, I remember when we spoke with Tony Detman, and he mentioned that he did not have a life that set him up to fundraise, right?
Such a good episode.
Yes, such a great episode. And so I think that qualification in that sense is done by other people in the referrals they give you.
Yes. So maybe if you come from this background that's a little more challenging, you have to lean into those first two pillars.
Yes.
You really do.
Yeah.
And you have to get people on your side who are willing to help you qualify, help you identify people that might be willing to give, and then go through the effort of cultivating that, and not just resting on, well, I'm going to send them a text. I'm going to send them a newsletter. I'll pop by once, give it some time, right? Ask those people in your network, who else has affinity for what I'm doing? That was an Ekren term that I really liked, right? Ask them for advice as the leaders, or as the kind of the thought leaders, or just social leaders in your circle. Ask them for advice. Like, who should I go to? Who would you recommend? And keep working your way through people, and don't give up on that. I love what Tony said. It's like, we don't beg for money, but we do beg
for referrals. Yeah. Something I really loved that Ekren said that would probably fall more into cultivation or stewardship is just this idea that when he was home, he would offer like his time and energy towards work days to show donors that he really valued them and wanted to invest in them as well. I thought that was really cool.
It kind of made me wish that I was one of his donors. I have some weeds for you, Ekren.
Yeah, but it did make me think, and this is, we often talk about how it's not a formula. There's not just one way to do this. And I loved that creative way that he kind of worked with his own giftings to offer something out of the norm. And I'm curious, have you run across any other maybe low cost, authentic ways that people cultivate donors or show their appreciation?
Not off the top of my head, but it makes me feel like I wish I would have been a little more creative.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, maybe just offering some babysitting if you're single and your families, your donor families are just at their wit's end or whatever. Like, that could be really, really helpful, I think. Love the yard work. Love the shoveling of snow.
Well, and you know what this makes me think of? This was early season 4, our conversation with Kenton, where he talked about how the Spirit led him to give, I think it was like a button. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a button, like a rare antique button that he had that these people he knew really loved, and he gave it to them. And because of how rare it was and
unique.
That was like a way that it really expressed love to them. And so, I mean, I guess I'm the one that asked you the question, but now I'm saying, I wonder if we just expect the Spirit to give ideas if he will.
Yeah. And be open to that. Like,
yeah.
I mean, yes, send them thank you cards, send them a postcard from a country. That's the baseline.
Yeah. But
let's get into maybe a habit of praying. Lord, guide me and direct me and help me to know how I can bless this individual.
Yeah. So to what you just said, I came across a passage in Acts a few weeks ago. Maybe I've talked about it on here before. But it just really struck me because I was reading about how Paul was speaking, and it said that God opened Lydia's heart to pay attention, and that's when she received the gospel. And so I've just been thinking a lot since then and praying a lot, open my heart to pay attention. And so I feel like that is kind of what you're saying, just like, Spirit, open my heart to pay attention.
Yeah.
And that kind of dovetails with, I think it was it Mary Valloni that said, when you're out and about and you see something, text people and tell them?
I love that. I've told that to so many people.
Right. And I think what that communicates is, with any of these practical recommendations and these kind of, systems that people can work through, there's always this tension between just working the system to get the outcome versus
Right.
entrusting yourself to the system knowing that it produces a certain outcome. You know what I mean? And so we want people to lean in to being aware, paying attention, and responding to that, not trying to curate that so that donors will respond in a certain way, but just genuinely having an intention to love them. Yeah.
I don't know if it was Mary. I think it was that video you sent me about body language.
Oh.
I think that's where it's from.
Okay.
But I have said that a lot.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we have to be careful about how we frame this when you're circling back to a donor and say, hey, thank you so much. Let me show appreciation for what you did. So they realize that it's not, that it is a thank you, and it's not like a transaction or an exchange for the money that they gave.
Right.
That can be kind of a tightrope situation.
Right.
We don't want people to think that, oh, if I keep giving, then I'm going to get a payout here.
Right. We want it to come out of a sense of offering, not obligatory.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
I also thought it was really interesting that Ekren just named that wealth does not equal generosity. I think we certainly know that to be true. We coach people on not expecting people to give just because they drive a certain car or they have a certain kind of house or even maybe they give to your friend or something, right? There's all kinds of things that can cue us up to have a certain expectation, but ultimately that might not be the person that God is bringing to you.
At the end of the day, you don't know how the Lord is leading somebody. We say that again and again and again. And how do you know unless you are spreading the net widely, unless you are talking about it every opportunity that you have?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, again, you don't really want to force that, but if this is who you are and this is the vision that you have to do this, it's going to come up naturally.
Mm-hmm.
So don't quench that. Don't squelch that down. I think the Lord uses that to maybe bring up those conversations, and maybe nothing happens financially, but maybe that person's encouraged. I think we have to be willing to let it all out there and just receive whatever comes back.
Mm-hmm. Well, you just never know what might happen down the line. I'm thinking of a conversation that we had, I think it was season 2 with Misty. And Misty and her family have been positioned to
give generously.
Right, to give generously. And she even told us that very rarely do they kind of say yes and join people in a routine way.
Right.
And that instead they just kind of have this pool of money that they seek the Spirit and give.
Yeah.
And I think she even mentioned that there were people that over time the Spirit would bring them to mind and they would give.
Okay.
Even if initially they didn't. So yeah, I don't know. I think that, on one hand, don't seek out people because you think they have money to give and target them, because that wouldn't be helpful. And then also, if they say no, that doesn't mean it's no forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a unique balance between, we don't want to see people just for their finances.
Right.
But Ekren does talk about qualifying donors.
And capacity. So
right. We have to hold those two things in tension.
Yeah.
And I think from a fundraiser's perspective, it can be a little almost disheartening to hear Misty when we're like, well, it would be so much easier if you would just keep giving. But I think the invitation there is to treat it like a relationship and not just I have this steady stream of income. It's not a stream of income. That's a person. And it's a partnership. It's a relationship. And so when Misty does that, she forces that fundraiser to re-engage.
Yeah. Well, and also, okay, actually, I don't think this has come up much in season 4, but season 3 is all about Elijah, right? And I just, I think about if God had just kind of kept it same, all right, the ravens bringing food, the brook bringing water, there would have never been the disruption and the need for the widow, which was actually consequential for everybody involved.
Right.
And that was needed.
Yeah.
And so I think that we can just trust that when there's disruptions or when things aren't maybe routine or they have to change, God is up to something.
Yeah. See God in the disruption.
Yes.
Yeah.
And his glory
Yeah.
is probably on the line.
Yeah. I think what we want is for things to be consistent and steady and comfortable and predictable. But that's not always good. It's usually not good for us.
As you said those words, I felt such calm in my body.
But
Yeah.
I think, if we did have that, after a while, like, what does that do to us? I think we become complacent.
We have no need.
We have no need.
And there's not dependence without need.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's hard, but it's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And not to make light of how challenging it is to walk through those things.
100%.
But I mean, we rest on the solid foundation that God is trustworthy and that God's purposes will stand.
Yeah.
And that's the anchor,
Yeah.
right? That's the thing that holds us in hope.
Yeah. Well, let's get a little bit practical here for a second. And can we explore what are some strategies for turning like a sporadic donor? And maybe it's the donor isn't being as intentional to think through it as Misty would. Like they just happen to be giving sporadically, right? How do we get them to be more consistent?
Yeah. I mean, I think you could always start with a spirit-led direct conversation. I think you could always express gratitude and just ask directly if they would be willing to, to give that amount for the next 6 months or the next year, 2 years or whatever. I mean, I think that, and again, I say spirit-led because maybe that's not the way to do it, but that feels like a next right thing, a direct conversation.
I think you're right. I think it depends on the moment and the situation, the scenario. Mm-hmm. I think of our friend who was raising funds to go to Japan for many years. And I think she had made progress, but then had kind of stalled for a while. The thing that really impressed me, that got me to actually give more, was just circling back to me as a donor and asking for it. Well, look how close I am. What do you think about a little bit more? What about these two options? And I was like, it's like, sure, I can give 10, 15, 20 bucks more a month. That's not a big deal. But if everybody's doing that,
right,
that really does help.
Right.
So I think it's normal, especially if you've been on the field for a long time, your expenses are going to change. Cost of living goes up, your circumstances morph. Maybe you have new goals. Maybe you have a new child, whatever it is, like, it's unrealistic for your donors to expect and for anybody to expect that your budget is static. So what does it look like to circle back to them and say, hey, we're doing a new drive just to kind of get us back up to fully funded again? Seems very palatable for a donor.
I really loved that when we asked Ekren what one of the biggest surprises in his field was, that he said he was most surprised by how generous people are. I loved that.
That's so good.
Yeah, I really loved that.
It shouldn't be surprising, but it really is. I think maybe that just speaks to our own hearts and how we assume that people are going to be stingy, or I don't know where that comes from, but yeah, let's start reframing and recasting what people think about donating and being generous. And
although I don't know, Andy, in thinking about the generosity of God, I think it should always take us by surprise and wow our hearts. I don't think we should ever get so comfortable with it that we stop being like awed.
Sure.
And so it's like also, as that image of God is reflected in humanity, maybe we shouldn't get to the point where we expect that, because maybe that comes at the cost of the like genuine gratitude and awe and wonder.
Well, or maybe it's like Tony said, right? Like as he saw God act, God expanded his need so that his faith continued to be stretched.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah, maybe like faithful in a little, entrusted with more. Maybe that's how that works.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so maybe in contrast to the generosity, what about no? What about when you get the answer of no? We kind of talked with Ekren a bit about that.
And his mantra, go until no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like maybe I can see in his work that that's probably a really helpful guiding principle. Right. I think that in Actually, I do think there's a lot of context in individual fundraising where that can be helpful, because I think sometimes people don't go until it's a no because they ping people a couple of times and don't hear back, and they assume that people aren't interested or that people don't want to give.
Yeah.
And they don't assume, well, they're just busy, but they're excited to talk to me, you know?
Right.
So there is a sense in which I think that can be helpful.
Yes, absolutely. I think probably most of the time it is, if they haven't directly said no, it is an assumption.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're just trying to read between the lines.
Mm-hmm.
Because think about it. If somebody has taken the time to sit down and read your letter or your beautifully crafted email, and I'm assuming we're at the front end of a kind of onboarding donors. If they've taken the time to do that, they've responded to a text or an email. They've sat down and had coffee with you and heard your whole vision and spiel. They said something like, yeah, I think so. I think I want to do that. I think a lot of times you don't give that enough weight. Like if they did if they said all those yeses, well, this is what I coach people all the time. It is now your job to close that circle. They've said enough yeses. We have to help them land the plane.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And, this isn't to minimize that it really can be hard to hear no. And I do think it's one of those things that as you ask, which positions you to receive an answer, and as you maybe even challenge your own ideas about what a no means. I'm thinking of our conversation with Callie Davis where she saw a no as a yes to somebody else. Like as you do that, I think that your own tolerance for hearing that will grow.
Yeah.
So if you're like fresh into support-based work and raising personal support, you are going to have some kind of emotional response to no.
It's going to feel tender.
We're not trying to tell you that like that's wrong. Yeah. I think we're just trying to tell you that doesn't mean you've done something wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
Your skin will thicken.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I loved Ekren's thought here. He said, view it as a reflection of the donor's circumstances, not the fundraiser's worth.
Mm-hmm.
That seems so helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's not about you. It's not a reflection of you or what you're doing. It's just this is the environment that this person happens to be in at this moment.
Yeah. And you can trust that it's for your benefit.
Absolutely.
Because as you were saying, it's going to thicken your skin. You know what I immediately thought of? I actually immediately thought of how when you're learning to play guitar, it's like really painful, but it develops calluses, but the calluses are like what enable you to play.
Yes.
And so I think we can just trust that if there's something that's creating some level of like wounding or exposure or something, that we can trust that God will steward that to a good end, you know?
Mm-hmm. And it still hurts for the first few months.
Yeah.
Playing guitar, right?
Yeah.
But you're never going to become Carlos Santana.
I mean,
I'm dating myself there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Trace Bundy. Not sure if anybody's heard of him. Have you heard of him?
Phil Keggy? No, I haven't heard of that person.
Oh man, you got to look him up.
Yeah.
I really loved the example he gave about how he mentioned the Turkish tulip to the people that he was supporting, and that like I feel like it was even a couple of years later, or they brought him an initial gift that was like a bag from a grocery store or something that had the Turkish tulip, but then they brought him a tapestry.
That's next
yeah.
level. Yeah.
I loved that.
Yeah.
And honestly, it made me think of my own experience. One of the things I really loved about my time overseas was finding and selecting things to bring back home for people. That was like a real delight for me. I'm a gifts person.
Mm-hmm.
And I could just, as he was telling that story, I could just remember how satisfying it felt to get a well-chosen gift for somebody that I wanted to thank.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, what would you say to those people that are like not gift givers? That kind of stresses them out a little bit.
Yeah. I would say talk to people on your team, your local team or your core team that might be gift people. Honestly, these days we have things like ChatGPT or Grok, or there's like all kinds of things that can generate ideas that I think you can then execute on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or even just simply like keeping a spreadsheet of your donors and having a field that says, here's the things they like.
Yeah. Or if you don't have insight into that, even bringing a local person into it, like the lady that you buy your fruit from or something, like, hey, what is something from your culture that you think an American would love to get or something? I don't know. Because even in that, there's a personal piece of it. Like, my fruit vendor told me that I should give this to you.
Yeah.
That's like, even more meaningful than like, oh, crap, I'm in the airport and I'm headed home and what should I do? You know?
What's the local... Right. I got you this keychain with it's a flip-flop and it says Maui on it or whatever it is. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, asking them, like, what is the local delicacy that only the insiders know about it, or only the people travel to hear from that are also from this country go to this city, this village, because it has the best tea, the best local honey, the best whatever that is, and bring that back, and then then you have a story connected to it. That's great.
You know what? It strikes me that even in that context, you could bring back used tea bags, and that would probably be well received.
Full circle. Yeah.
Anything else from what Ekren said that you want to highlight?
It is interesting to think about how do we need to adapt our stewardship based on the demographic of our donors?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that? Like, I have a Gen Z donor all the way up to a boomer. What strategies do you think would be helpful?
Yeah. I mean, I think as in many things, it's probably just holding the tension between wanting to meet people where they are and proactively seeking out how you can be informed, but then also just being aware and not putting yourself in a position where you are in a negative way becoming all things to all people, like in a way where you're not showing up real anymore. Yeah, so in ways that make sense for you, be all things to all people, like Paul says, but not at the expense of being real and authentic.
Right. You're not some chameleon trying to blend into every social environment the group need me to be.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And honestly, I'm going to kick it back to really the more information you can have about the way you work and the ways God has like gifted you, I really think the easier it will be to see how that plays out with different people. Right? Like if you know if you have an understanding of your spiritual gifts, then you're going to maybe even be more aware of like how the Spirit infuses His power in that no matter the circumstance. Or if you're aware of your strengths or the things that you're not as strong in. Like I don't really like social media. People that follow our Instagram account will probably
our
be like,
Instagram account.
Yeah. Or it's not about the money because they're like, you don't really do a lot. Yeah. For me, as somebody who that's just not a space that I like to spend a lot of time or intuitively have a lot for.
Which is probably good.
Maybe.
Actually.
For me to decide that that's the only place I'm going to engage, Gen Z or whatever, maybe it feels like a smart move, but it's like not going to work because I'm not authentically able to do that. And it will just kind of always be energy draining.
Yeah.
Versus knowing like, hey, maybe once a week I'll like pop something on there.
And they'll feel, and maybe they can pick up that, oh, she doesn't even like doing this.
Probably.
Right?
Yeah.
Like this feels like a stretch for her.
Yeah. How about you? What would you say?
To me, it speaks to the need to have a holistic kind of strategic communication strategy and not lean on, well, I'm just going to do Instagram. And, if my donors aren't there, I can't help it. I don't have the margin for that.
Sure.
I think we need to make margin to a certain extent to meet people where they are.
Mm-hmm.
And if everybody's on email, if everybody's in Facebook, I mean, maybe we have to discipline ourselves just to do that a little bit and like a job and put it into our calendar.
Yeah.
And just say, I'm going to do that every once in a while.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm saying don't force yourself into a box that doesn't fit who you are, which is helpful. And you're saying, hey, be willing to like let your box of who you are expand a little bit.
Right.
Yeah. Good.
Well, and that's kind of the final point that I'd like to highlight is that fundraising does take discipline and takes perseverance. And that's what Ekren encouraged us. Like there is discipline involved. And you can't rely, he advised against relying on our feelings alone.
Yeah. You're not always going to feel like it.
Yeah. I mean, I think Ekren is wired in such a way where he doesn't take things personally, but I think we have to get to that point as well, and just be able to activate and keep going, regardless of the moment or the recent track record, and just know that it's the vision that drives us, not people's answers.
Yeah. So if you have not listened to Ekren's episode yet, we would highly encourage you to do so.
Why are you listening to the recap first?
Yeah, really.
After all.
I mean, sometimes people get out of order. It's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. But excellent episode. And then after this, coming up next week, we kick off our church partnerships mini-series, which is a great time.
Very practical.
Very practical. So we'll catch you next time.
Thanks for joining us.
It's Not About the Money is presented by Provisio Fundraising Solutions. Provisio equips support-based workers with flexible training, practical resources, and one-on-one coaching. Find out more at provisiofundraising.com.